The audio you are about to hear is best played at maximum volume when you and your partner are making love. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Gorilla Roundtable. With us on tonight's panel are Mike, an MBA and free market enthusiast, Nick, a PhD and political economist, and Paul, a neuroscience graduate student studying addiction and humanity at large. On this week's program, the gang discusses Croatian debt, Radio Shack's bankruptcy, Nigerian elections, Agenda 21 as the conspiracy of the week, and whether a split party ticket could succeed in the 2016 presidential race.
All right, folks, this week.
I like this music.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah,
That's
a good one.
Dancing around over here.
I kept away from the Mike Tyson this week. Wanted to keep it classy. Wanted to keep it clean, folks. This is Gorilla Roundtable. I am Mike.
I'm Nick.
I'm Paul.
It's been a heck of a week, guys. I read an article in the Examiner that talked about how Ghostbusters is the most libertarian Hollywood blockbuster of all time.
I'm kind of curious what the criterion for that were. Well, how you determine what is a libertarian movie.
Well, one of the main things was that the EPA is cast as the villain, but that was definitely interesting.
Yeah, maybe Chud is a libertarian movie since the NL Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the bad guy there.
Chud, yeah. Chud, that stands for Children of Urban Development, right?
Yeah.
Although, technically, cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers.
Oh, that's right.
Libertarian, the libertarian interpretation of that would be weird, because I've always thought about that as a movie about, proletarian class warfare, but...
Who's your favorite actor in that movie?
Oh, Daniel Stern, come on, obviously.
Daniel Stern, yeah.
Daniel Stern. As the, raggedy-looking soup kitchen patron
I don't know. I'm always partial to Rick Moranis. He was in that, right?
You can't beat.
I don't think Rick Moranis was in Chud. I don't think he was in that.
Well, we're talking about Ghostbusters here.
Oh, they were talking about Chud.
Oh. I don't know. I think you wanted to talk about Chud. We could talk about Chud.
I always want to talk about Chud. Yeah. Do you not want to talk about Chud?
Yeah, I can't imagine a situation where we
cannibalistic.
talk about Chud.
Oh. Yeah. Either way, I gotta say, I want to point this out at the beginning of the show. It's been a good week for us on the old Twitter there. I don't know if you guys have been, how closely you're following our feed, but we've got a couple of likes. We're building up some followers. The Twitter's going well for us.
Yeah, that's where the money's made.
Yeah, so everyone who's listening, make sure you follow us on Twitter. See the brilliant thoughts that we're encapsulating in 140 characters or less. They'll make you smarter. They'll make your day better. It's worthwhile.
And that's a guarantee. You can take that to the bank. You could take it to a Croatian bank.
Well, you might not want to, but it's an excellent segue into the thing that I really want to talk about this week. So the last couple weeks, you guys will remember we've talked about Greece a couple times. So we've been talking about these issues of debt. We've been talking about these issues of international finance. So when I came across this story, I thought, man, we really want to. I really want to talk about it in general. But I thought, man, it would really fit in very well with the kind of theme we've had going on. So I don't know if you guys have heard about this. But basically, in this past week or so, Croatia decided to basically cancel debts for some of its poorest citizens. I don't know if you guys heard about this.
Now, Croatia used to be Yugoslavia, is that right?
It used to be part of Yugoslavia, yeah. It was one of the 5 republics.
Part of Yugoslavia, right.
Yeah.
I heard something about it, but probably not as much as you're gonna drop on me right now.
Yeah. Well, let me fill you in on sort of what's going on in Croatia. And sort of why I found this really interesting is because, if you look back through history, and of course, me, with the historical eye, cancellation of debts is a kind of political demand of the underclass that goes back to, the beginnings of civilization itself, right? Beyond ancient Greece, back to ancient Sumeria. So, it's sort of a new instance of a very long-standing revolutionary political tradition. Basically, so what happened in Croatia is sort of the following. Since 2009, they've been caught up in the, Euro crisis, in the global economy crisis that kind of issued out of the 2008 collapse here in the U.S. So over that time, from then to now, their economy has shrunk by, about 13 to 15%. Last year, over 300,000 Croatians had access to their bank accounts blocked because of debts they owed. And this is out of a total population of only, about 4.5 million people, right? So this is affecting a lot of people. And so what the government decided to do, and what I think, is a really revolutionary and radical step, especially in this age of austerity politics, is the government passed a law to cancel debts for the poorest people. And so basically the program is going to apply basically to people who have a total debt of less than 35,000 kuna, or about $5,100. And you have to have a monthly income of less than $138. And so basically this could cost the government about $31 to $300 million in total. And it aims to help upwards of, say, 60,000 Croatian people. It's going to hopefully get them out of debt. And basically, if they were to go through, when they follow through with this program, what they might end up doing is abolishing, say, the report I read, say 1 to 7% of the total debt owed by Croatia. And so this is really, or owed by Croatians. So this is really interesting because what this is not, right, is a bailout, right? And I think that's, to me, the most interesting part of this, is that this is not a bailout. The government is going to work with public and private companies. It's going to work with telecoms. It's going to work with banks. It's going to work with utilities, basically to write off these debts. They're going to be discharged, right? This is not basically where the government, like what happened in America, where the government takes taxpayer money and gives it to the bank as a payment for the debt. Basically, what Croatia aims to do is reduce the total debt of Croatians by less than 10%, but end up freeing about 20%, so about a fifth of all Croatian debtors from their debt obligation, right? Hopefully paving the way for them to spend more of their earnings, right? To kickstart consumer spending, to get their economy going, right? So this is a really interesting kind of macroeconomic policy proposal here, one that has certainly not been tried in many other places in a long time, if ever, right? This is not something that happens very often. I mean, look at what's happening with Greece. They're fighting tooth and nail to get their debt written down. Argentina is still fighting, right, tooth and nail in courts to get their debt restructured. So, this is a really interesting kind of program. But and this is something I want to kind of talk to Mike about, because this is, I think, kind of up your alley. I'm curious if you think there's some kind of potential moral hazard problem here, right? Could this move by the government further discourage, loans to the poor, right? If the government is just going to cancel the debts every time people get too indebted, are the banks just going to not lend the money? I think, I'll get your take on that.
Now, you think that my answer would be yes, there's going to be not a moratorium, but there's going to be a slowdown in lending. I don't think that's the case. The banks in this case might as well just give, the government a big high five. And the reason for that is the government has given them cover to now raise rates on everybody prospectively, just in case this happens again. In the end, that will probably raise more money for the bank than it's going to cost any given bank in complying with government mandates on this program. So there's definitely a moral hazard. Do I think it's going to slow lending? No. Do I think it's going to increase the cost of capital? Absolutely.
Do you think that the banks that go along with this, that you don't have to be dragged kicking and screaming? Do you think those banks gain some very useful, good PR?
They probably do, but in the end, arrangement with banks as a counterparty for a loan are mostly driven by economics. The majority of people who go through and finance big-ticket items with a bank are going to do so based on interest rate. They're not going to do so based on, which bank has the smiley face on their logo. On government-held debt, there's almost an argument to be made for debt cancellation, because it's debt in service of the people, held by the people. If you're going to make an argument for cancellation of some kind of debt, that almost would make sense. At least there's a room for an argument for it. But for a private non-bank corporation, it's almost theft. I mean, the government's literally stepping in and saying that corporations are not entitled to their own property. They're not entitled to their own receivables. In principle, this is a much bigger deal. You are, as a consumer that is being told that they don't have to pay a debt, the idea is they can stimulate the economy by spending those dollars elsewhere, but those dollars really belong to somebody else. And the only reason they're going to somebody else instead of the person that would otherwise receive that debt service is the government stepping in and saying, you don't have to pay A, instead pay B, C, D, or E.
Right. So, I mean, I know, and that's more along the lines of kind of what I thought you would kind of react with. Sort of, I guess my sort of last question for you, or at least, in this line of thought, Mike, is that, I'm curious what you make of sort of this idea of the debt cancellation versus the bailout, right? Do you think maybe would the Croatians be better served, doing a more traditional kind of bailout where they fed more taxpayer dollars into the supply side and recapitalize the banks rather than, across the board wiping out the debts? I mean, even if the companies they're volunteering to do this.
Bailouts are really just corporate welfare, and I am not in favor of corporate welfare. I am not in favor of bailouts. Too big to fail is an atrocity. The whole concept behind too big to fail is an atrocity. It really is atrocious. Companies need to fail. Part of capitalism is robust competition. The only way it works is robust competition. It doesn't work when companies get propped up by the government.
Yeah. No, and that's right. I mean, and we've talked before, so much that, I kind of figured that, and I know you take that kind of Schumpeterian line about creative destruction. My question for Paul, I guess, really is there a lesson here for anyone else, right? Is this just Croatia? Are they just, a kind of small former Yugoslav country that can do this kind of thing? Or is debt cancellation, or I guess we should say, should debt cancellation of this kind of, like this, should this be a bigger part of the programs of, left and labor-leaning parties in bigger countries, the U.S. in particular?
Now, Croatia, I think they just joined the European Union fairly recently, within the last few years, but they're still quite poor and compared to the other EU nations. And I mean, I think as an effort to, number one, reduce unemployment in the nation and to increase their GDP power, I think this is a move that the entire country had to make, whether or not you're the government or whether you're companies. The other point I want to make about the type of debt that these people have is, from what I understand, this debt is not necessarily loan debt. Mostly it's utilities debt, it's telecommunications debt, electricity, phones, that sort of stuff, right? And so these people are extremely poor. They're making less than, I think, 1/3 minimum wage, and as such, these people essentially who are getting the debt cancellation have no chance of getting themselves out of this situation, right? So I'm skeptical whether it's going to be whether it's more of a moral hazard type situation with the companies and the banks, and rather than it is maybe a more socialist, that is between the government and the companies and the banks, opportunity to raise Croatia's GDP, to raise their status, to reduce unemployment, which for the country itself is about 20 to 30% right now. For young people, unemployment's 50%. I think the core capitalist economies can take something away from this. Now, of course, the core capitalist economies, the U.S., the U.K., Australia, Germany, they have, of course, bankruptcy, right? So bankruptcy is not exactly what this is in this case, but bankruptcy does allow for individuals who are at the poorest spectrum to be able to recover and to be able to have some of their debt forgiven. So I think in the sense that a program like this might be implemented in the richer nations, in some level it's already there. I think that, the left-leaning organizations can take something from this to say, this not only has the government but also banks and companies banded together to try to help a fairly large percentage of the population in a single country, which is certainly laudable.
What you described to me, right, sounds like Detroit, people trapped under utilities debt, right? People trapped by, low housing prices, by, low family net worth, by unemployment, right? By lack of services, right? The sort of this downward spiral caused by, austerity and neglect and, right, globalization, right? And so that's the kind of thing that makes me wonder, right? Can this be a bigger thing in the U.S.? Or do you think that, we're just going to be stuck with this kind of, almost quasi-religious mentality about paying back our debts?
I think it's going to have to catch on. I mean, particularly with regard to student loan debt.
No, again, Paul, I think you're right. Student loan debt is definitely a problem for people. But from economic conundrums abroad, let's turn it over to Mike, who wants to talk about a more domestic economic issue.
Now, I know you guys are familiar with Radio Shack, the 94-year-old consumer electronics chain. They finally declared bankruptcy. That's been teetering for a while. They worked a deal with Sprint, which would sell some stores to Sprint and allow Radio Shack to be a small store within the Sprint store. It started as a ham radio supplier, so basically a supplier of parts to hobbyists. They almost went bankrupt in the 1960s, was bought out by Tandy Corporation. It introduced one of the first mass-produced PCs. They started in the 90s trying to compete with Walmart and Best Buy and sell big box electronics like TVs, cell phones, things like that. And they started getting away from the hobbyist crowd. They used to sell transistors and speaker wire and capacitors, and if you were into soldering, you could buy soldering kits there and build your own electronics, stuff like that. So they got away from that, and now they're going to go bankrupt. Is this a simple story of a brick-and-mortar dinosaur in the age of big box and the internet? And if big box killed the smaller mom and pops and the internet is killing big box, where does retail go? So I wanted to get Nick's take on that.
Mike, this is, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think this is kind of interesting. And I'm in a lot of ways, I'm torn. I think in the case of Radio Shack, this definitely is a very simple story of them not being able to compete against the Walmarts and the bigger box retailers. That's what I think is is undermining Radio Shack. But I think, to your larger question about the internet versus big box, this is something where I think it's much less cut and dry. I think I remember some stories, every so often about Amazon was going to buy out Best Buy, or they were going to buy out Circuit City, or, Amazon was going to move into the big box game as a kind of a showroom or something. Ultimately, I don't know that either one of these two, obviously big box can't dominate the internet anymore. The internet is going to be a huge commercial space. It's going to dominate retail. But I don't know that the big box, the brick and mortar retailers are going to go out of business. I think there's still something within the consumer psyche in America that, people like having some place they can go where, people are going to be there to help them with their problem. So I think what we're going to see are continuing, evolving relationships and symbioses between the big box retailer and the online. I hate to tout them because I don't like them, but I think the Apple Store is something of a model of what brick and mortar and online fusion will look like. Something even more than that probably. A lot of stores are integrating online ordering and in-store pickups and maybe something like that, but I definitely don't see them as one is going to be able to kill the other.
One of the criticisms that has come around is that people are going to Best Buy to look at items and to play with items and to get a sense of what that item is, and then going home and ordering them off of Amazon. And so a lot of these big box retailers have literally become Amazon showrooms. Because I want to ask Paul this question. Paul, as part of Radio Shack's decline in popularity, in line with University of Manchester's Professor Danielle George's assessment of the lost generation, that being the millennials who can no longer mend objects in their world, one of the things to keep in mind is that Radio Shack was started as a supply for hobby enthusiasts, and it's dying just as things like makers fairs and celebrations of STEM culture are starting to gain a foothold in America.
So that's a great question, Mike. And my old iPhone, the power button just stopped working one day, and so I Googled it. I went online. I found out that this is a common issue for iPhones, and so I was able to go into my iPhone. I bought a kit for like $5, and I was able to go in there and fix it up myself. And then I turned it in, got the new iPhone, and whatever. It was as if nothing had happened. But, of course, most people will just say, oh, my iPhone's broken, or they'd pay $100 to get it fixed. I kind of do think that people are much less likely to be the fixer-upper type than we've seen in the past that's, associated with Radio Shack, and I think that has contributed to its decline. So, in my mind, the type of personality that's a kind of a techie fixer-upper these days is much more likely to be, for example, coding software, programming software, than repairing their own devices. Nowadays, as Nick was pointing out, you can just Google, and as you were pointing out, Mike, You can just Google what you need for a project. You can buy it on Amazon, right? Even if you're one of these people. And for the most part, if you're an electrician or fixer-upper, that's your go-to thing now. Watch a video on YouTube, then buy it on Amazon or somewhere else. So I think that for most people, we've actually kind of reached some ceiling where it turns out that the sunk costs of buying electrical components that they'd sell at Radio Shack, along with the time to assemble them together to fix up whatever your device is, I think these sunk costs are greater than just buying new stuff. It's being produced in the market at much higher rates than ever before. Now, I'm not saying that this is the right move, for example. I think there's a few things that have contributed to this. I think it's much trendier now to have brand new gadgets, right? I think these gadgets are designed to go obsolete more quickly. I don't think we can argue with that. And I think, in general, people have much less patience to fix things because of the pace of our society. And I think on top of that, there's better marketing campaigns. There's more consolidation of the distribution of these products. For example, Apple. Another thing that I've considered with regard to fixing up your devices and your gadgets is I think there's more corporate contracts and more corporate power, kind of stipulating that if you mess with your devices, you're going to void some warranty, right? Or at the very least, people are afraid of this. They don't want to get inside their iPhone, start screwing around, and then something else goes wrong. They're going to void their warranty and have to pay $600 out of pocket for a new phone.
No, right? That's a very good point, Paul. That really is a good point. And one of the things that you said that I had not considered is almost the virtual world. You're right. There's a lot of tinkerers, quote unquote, that will tinker in software, and they, instead of dabbling on a circuit board, they dabble with code, with writing Java, C++, or PHP, or whatever code that they choose. And that's a very good point. That's something I really hadn't considered. When we think about the impact of the internet and software and all of those things, and that everything that STEM encapsulates, it really is changing the way that people live. I am wondering, down the road, are we going to be moving polling places online? That almost makes you wonder if online polling would be any help in the upcoming Nigerian elections. And
I will say at the very outset, in northern Nigeria, the internet is very sparse, to say the least. So at least in northern Nigeria, that's not going to be happening anytime soon, but it's certainly a possibility in the richer nations. But I do want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Nigerian elections. Now, this is interesting and contentious for a few different reasons. Originally scheduled for Valentine's Day, February 14th, were the Nigerian presidential and general elections. And actually, I found out this morning, read an article, these were just postponed to March 28th. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So what's going on with these elections? Well, this is the first election since 2011 when the current incumbent president, whose name is Goodluck Jonathan, was elected into office. So now it's worth noting that Nigeria has been considered a democracy for 16 years, essentially since the elections of 1999. So who are the major candidates in this election? So first we have the incumbent, of course, President Goodluck Jonathan. He's in the People's Democratic Party, or the PDP. And challenging him is a former military ruler by the name of Muhammad Buhari from the All Progressives Congress. Buhari himself actually was a military ruler from 1983 to 1985. Now, he wasn't elected, actually. He seized power in a coup. And he himself was actually overthrown in a coup in 1985, which alleged that Buhari actually failed to deal with the economic issues of Nigeria. But what a lot of people claim actually happened in this coup is that Buhari was known to be extremely tough on corruption. Corruption being a huge issue in Nigeria and other African nations in the governments. But Buhari was particularly tough on it. Many actually think that he was overthrown by corrupt inner circle members who feared their own imprisonment by their boss. And so now the incumbent, Goodluck Jonathan, has not actually been as strong on corruption. However, the elections in 2011, when he was elected, were deemed fair, but his popularity has been going down because he hasn't done much to curb the corruption. A couple facts about Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. It's the 21st largest in the world, and it's the 7th most populous country in the world. So it's got a larger economy than South Africa, which might surprise a lot of people. It's the member of the UN, OPEC, several other international organizations. And so now I want to kind of talk about this delay in the elections, right? So the elections were delayed 6 weeks. until March 28th. This is just announced. So the commissioner the commissioner chief named Atahiro Jega, he said that the delay was they had the delay because of a lack of troops available to protect voters in certain, especially northern areas of the country. Now, why do the voters need to be protected? Well, what's going on in the north is that there's rampant Boko Haram attacks, especially in the northeast part of the country, that the Nigerian military are trying to combat, and they're increasingly less able to do so. There's a question of whether or not this delay is actually going to help the Nigerian military fight off these attacks and make it a safer condition. I mean, analysts point out that the conflicts have been going on for 5 years, and a delay of 6 weeks on that scale is unlikely to, perhaps impossible, to result in a safer environment for the voters, right? And so, many Nigerians are calling bullshit on the delay. Many nations, including the U.S., have condemned it. People are alleging that President Jonathan is really just trying to buy himself more time to strengthen his campaign, actually. But it's not really clear whether or not the delay is going to favor President Jonathan or Buhari, particularly because it's actually in the northern parts of the country where these where the election cards need to be distributed more, and in the more dangerous Boko Haram-controlled areas where Buhari's supporters are located, where his voting base is. And Boko Haram, for those of you who don't know, they're an Islamic fundamentalist militant group. They are fighters operating mainly in northern Nigeria. And so even in the wake of aid from China and the United States to the Nigerian military, they're clearly being overrun by Boko Haram. Nick, I wanted to ask you a question about this. Now, what do you think about the delay of the election? Do you think it should have been delayed due to the dearth of voting card distribution and the Boko Haram attacks, or for other reasons more generally? Do you think instead it's better for the elections to go on as planned?
It really is tough to say. I mean, I surely don't know the nuts and bolts of Nigerian politics terribly well. And so to speculate about, who might garner political advantage from the delay, whether it's, Goodluck Jonathan or his opponent, I can't speak to that. But I mean, certainly what you can say is that, or I think what your other point was right on. This has been going on for 5 years. Boko Haram isn't going to be gone in 6 weeks. That it's not like they only need 6 more weeks to distribute these voting cards, and then everything is going to be fine. I mean, you still have Boko Haram everywhere. They're not going to allow this election to go on, unhampered. So, distributing more voting cards, that's not going to help. Even more troops. I mean, more troops aren't going to help. I mean, more troops will be there on the day of the election, and then the next day they'll be gone. And the people who stuck their neck out to go vote and cast a ballot, they'll be first on Boko Haram's hit list when they come back through, because, it's a better bet that Boko Haram will be back in town before the Nigerian military is back in town. And so basically, the delay is kind of I want to say moot, but, until you can really do something about Boko Haram, all the delays in the world won't really help your election be, any freer or fairer, or, help you include more people who are being terrorized by Boko Haram.
Right. That's a really good point. Maybe we can swing this to discuss, more about the economic impact. Mike, I'll swing this to you. The economic impact, maybe not only of the elections, as far as you know, but also the influence of Boko Haram. And do you think, for example, this is going to affect the economy and for not only Nigeria but also for Africa? And do you think it's possible that Boko Haram might institute a coup itself? And what effect might that have, Mike?
So one of the things that I find interesting about this whole situation is here is a situation where the people are wanting the military at the polling places. Now, normally that is a no-no. You don't want the military anywhere near the polling places, but you almost want to have them here. So I found that to be somewhat counterintuitive, but it's very instructive as to the situation on the ground there. As to the Nigerian economy and the results of the election, I almost want to say it's a wash. I almost want to say it doesn't matter. Nigeria is certainly going to have to deal with market uncertainty, and they're doing that right now. And that kind of volatility is never good for Nigeria or any regions that share any amount of economic dependence on Nigeria. But I wanted to point out that Nigeria is probably suffering more from a low crude oil price than they are because of this. The currency's starting to lose global relative value. Their budget is set at $65 per barrel of oil. So it's way overstated. The amount of revenue that they're expecting to spend, tax revenue, is way overstated. So it matters less who's pulling the levers of control and more that the oil revenue that they're expecting is not going to show up. And if there's any instability to the region, or if there's any threat of instability to the region, in my mind it comes more from those oil revenues, the tax revenues that are not going to show up, more so than influence of Boko Haram or which corrupt tyrannical dictator you elect into office.
I do want to make the point here. Those are some really good points, Mike, and I hadn't thought about the oil issue. Certainly very relevant. But it does seem to be the case that there's a clear difference in between the candidates and who might fight corruption more than the other. And I mean, in terms of we're talking about some very rich politicians here that are at the top, and that at least the U.S. Defense Department and I'm sure other organizations have claimed, are clearly skimming off the top from their corrupt activities. And so, not to say that this doesn't occur in other nations, but it's I think rampant here. And so, it seems like the election might result in a condition where we have someone possibly who's more willing to fight corruption, but of course, who knows what the outcome will be in the long run. And I'm sure there's many conspiracy theories that people have about the election itself and about whose motives are going where. So, I actually wanted to lead into the conspiracy of the week now. On that note, where I'm going to be talking about Agenda 21. Yeah.
And now it's time for the conspiracy of the week.
There's a conspiracy out there. You know what I'm saying? There's a conspiracy. A C-O-N-spiracy.
Oh, God, guys, I got a great conspiracy for you. And I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about this. I think we might fall on different sides here. So I'm excited to present this. And this is something that's been going on for a few years already. So, and the topic is Agenda 21. So you guys know what Agenda 21 is? Have you heard of this?
I've heard of such things.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Nick has heard of it. And Mike is being a bit more conspiratorial about the whole idea.
Nick has the autographed copy of the Glenn Beck book.
Framed above his bed. As do I. All right, so guys, what's Agenda 21? So let's flash back to 1992, right? In Rio de Janeiro, the UN held a conference on environment and development called, the Conference on Environment and Development. So during this conference, there were many issues raised. These included how to tackle poverty, how to promote health, fight deforestation, fight pollution, in addition, how to manage biotech, how to promote the role of groups including workers, workers and women and farmers. And finally, the conference considered how to put into action the suggestions that were raised at the conference, essentially, in the end, to try to foster a more sustainable Earth as our population continues to grow. So Agenda 21, the 21 refers to the 21st century. So the Agenda 21 came out of this, which is, and I'm quoting a definition here from Wikipedia, it's a non-binding, voluntarily implemented action plan. All right, so let's talk about implementation for a minute. What's been done regarding Agenda 21? So, as we all know, many times in general, it's at the local level that we can see the benefits of governmental or international programs. So, these local reforms have included things like preserving open space, for example, expanding public transportation routes, adding dedicated bike lanes, using energy-smart appliances in the home, adding smart meters to appliances, and many other things. In terms of implementation, let's take Europe, for example. In Europe, Agenda 21 has actually received widespread acceptance. For example, in Sweden, all local governments have an Agenda 21 initiative. Here's a conspiracy part. The Tea Party, mainly in America, along with libertarians and to some extent the Republican Party, have been campaigning against Agenda 21. Because the idea is it's all a big conspiracy to deprive individuals of their sovereignty, right, which is anti-American. So, for example, even though Agenda 21 is non-binding, Alabama has banned government involvement in Agenda 21. Arizona is close to doing so. Alaska is currently fighting it, and at the local level, activism has had recent successes. Now, of course, when you're making environmental changes to better sustain a growing population, now we have to take into consideration part of your property might have to be repurposed in some cases, right? Or your plans to expand your property might be denied. So essentially what this conspiracy comes down to is it's essentially a property rights problem for many people. Now, I think, and you guys may disagree, but I think the conversation has gone out of control. So Stanley Kurtz, who's a well-known conservative columnist and lecturer, he's lectured at University of Chicago and Harvard, among other places. He wrote in an article, I think for the National Review, President Obama is not a fan of American suburbs. Indeed, he intends to abolish them. That's a quote. And as we pointed out earlier, Glenn Beck has written a sci-fi dystopian novel wherein suburban homeowners are removed from their property, placed against their will, essentially in festering urban hell's kitchens, all at the behest of Agenda 21. So what do you guys think? Is Agenda 21 really destroying our suburbs?
Is that even a serious question?
Yeah, Nick, what do you think about this?
I think this is, like, to me, the whole Agenda 21 thing is crazy for a lot of reasons. So here's just one, though. So if you look at Agenda 21, and I think the Wikipedia thing doesn't really sell it, like, because there's a whole lexicon of diplomatic language and what words mean when they're used in the context of these resolutions. So, like, what you ultimately end up with when you look at Agenda 21 is the kind of non-binding means no one has to do anything, which means ultimately no one will do anything, right? The reason you pass non-binding resolutions is because you don't care if anyone does anything, because because they're not binding, no one is going to. So basically, here you have a document, this, supposed action plan, that is exactly the kind of thing that people lambaste the UN for all the time, for producing these feckless resolutions and plans and programs that ultimately go nowhere because there's nothing behind them. So, Agenda 21 from one angle is just another one of these kind of things that people criticize the UN for. And yet somehow there's this crazy conspiratorial right-wing reaction here in America that sees the UN, right, totally contrary to how almost everyone else sees it, as this, hyper-vigilant, hyper-efficient organization capable of carrying out world domination. I just don't understand on some level how these same right-wing people can think the UN is this, like, totally bumbling, idiotic, useless organization that never does anything right and screws up everything it does, but also see it as, like, so ruthlessly domineering and powerful that it could implement this Agenda 21 and destroy their suburbs and, as Ted Cruz thinks, right, take away their golf courses and paved roads. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, I get that, there are people who fear climate change and fear what social consequences that could bring. I get that there are insane people who, see the Jews behind everything. But, ultimately, like, I just think this is kind of funny because, again, it's a non-binding resolution, and the only people who have done anything on it are the same kind of, socially progressive and liberal countries that would have been doing this anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. I have to agree with Nick.
People are freaking out for nothing.
I have to agree with Nick in that the left in the United States has never needed the United Nations as a justification for putting forth policies that would destroy America. They can do so on their own behest.
That's a very good point.
This conspiracy comes out of both ends of the political spectrum.
So I find it very interesting that, and I know this is somewhat dated because not that the conspiracy's dated, but the convention that gave rise to the agenda, that is Agenda 21, occurred in the 90s. If I recall what Paul just said.
Yes.
Before Kyoto even.
Yeah, so I guess, my criticism would be, doesn't the UN have better things to do in modern times than to put forth, as Nick pointed out, these feckless policies? But this is just kind of a general policy statement for them, everybody should be happy and unicorns and all that and in a perfect world and yada yada. So I do find it interesting as well that folks have gravitated to this and they want to put blame on this, whereas, you would probably be more accurate to blame your local politician. That being said, if I had to say there was one truism to this entire conversation about Agenda 21, it's this. It is non-binding, and of course there's no mass conspiracy where people are in smoky back rooms making decisions, but they did, and I think the point of it was they would lay out a groundwork, and then politicians who wanted to move towards goals that Agenda 21 puts forth can follow that groundwork. Politicians in a position to do so. Does that mean the suburbs are going anywhere anytime soon? Absolutely not. The suburbs in the United States are dying for a completely different reason.
Mike, I think that's dead on balls accurate, if I may say. I want to ask you guys, if Agenda 21 is not trying to control the world, what about, say, Rand Paul?
And now, Presidential Roundtable.
That's a very hip opening to Presidential Roundtable. That's to keep the millennials interested.
Hail to the chief.
We show that we speak their language. So the 2016 U.S. presidential election is hot news. Things are slowly coming into focus, and lots of questions are open. One of the things, guys, at this point is the field of contenders are all over the place. Guerrilla Roundtable this week was posed an interesting question. We're all familiar with Dr. Rand Paul, the Libertarian Republican Senator from Kentucky, as well as Cory Booker, Democratic Senator from New Jersey. It was posed to us, what if Rand Paul ran for president with Cory Booker as his running mate? One of the things that I remember back when John McCain ran last for president, it was contemplated, would he select Blue Dog conservative Democrat Joe Lieberman as his running mate? And that caused quite a stir. Of course, it never came to be, but there were a lot of intellectual exercises ran, thought experiments, if you will, where people kind of contemplated what would be. So let's run one of those right now. Nick, what's your take on this? How would different parties react? How would the folks react to a split party ticket?
Friend of the show, Clem, was good enough to bring this to our attention because I gotta be honest, for me, 2016 isn't totally on the radar yet. I know that the election cycles for this get longer every year, but honestly, I don't know how the American voters would react. I mean, my first supposition is that it might be pretty positive, given, the low approval ratings for Congress over the last half decade plus, given the constant talk about partisan rancor and partisan gridlock and the government shutdowns and the debt ceilings and there could be a huge payoff for somebody to do this, ultimately, I don't know that it actually does anything to address gridlock or, anything like that it's not just a ploy. But even as a ploy, I think there's a lot to be gained from someone using this ploy. I think American voters could very well respond positively depending on who the ticket is and what their message is. Democrats, who knows? I think they might be it's hard to say either party would be more or less for it. You would want to say maybe that the Republicans would be less for it than the Democrats, but I think that's probably a pointless argument. Either way, I think it would come down to two very strong individuals, who do this. Maybe Cory Booker signs on to this because he thinks it positions him for a run for something later. Maybe Rand Paul does it because he thinks it helps him win now. Maybe it does. Maybe it works out for both of them that way. But it would seem odd to me that either party would, or to say that the established leadership in either party would really want to push this, right? This doesn't seem like it would be, really their ball game. So I think it would have to come from somebody who's kind of on the fringe, a Rand Paul type.
So let me ask you this, Paul. Would this to voters be the ultimate in collusion? We hear all the time that the federal government, particularly between the two parties, is an oligarchy, and they just are kind of trading power back and forth. So would this basically the throwing out of competition, in a sense, would that ultimately prove that out to the people?
Yeah, I think a large percentage of the population might view it that way. I think it's tough to say at this stage of the election or this stage of the election campaigns, what relationships will remain together, what relationships will split apart. But yeah, I think that many people will say, this is just another example where Democrats and Republicans are reaching across the aisle to pat each other's back for some political or some economic favor that will come down the pike in the future. Now, I will say, I'm a biomedical scientist, and so especially as regards Rand Paul, whatever candidate he chooses to run with, I hope he is a supporter of vaccines. Vaccines are in any way leading to mental disorders.
Pro-vaccine VP, because we're talking about the unity ticket here.
Yeah, he definitely. If this is a unity ticket, I hope Cory Booker is pro-vaccine. Is all I have to say. I'm assuming he is.
How would the international community respond?
This is some. I mean, I would think generally pretty favorably, because I think that it's certainly the case that the obvious dysfunctionality in our legislative branch, it affects the reliability of America as a political partner. It affects the ability of Americans and Europeans, or, whatever bilateral partners we have. It affects our ability to, swiftly and expediently follow through on the things that need to be done, for international cooperation to take place. So, again, as long as this is a gesture towards cooperation, a gesture towards unity and cohesion and, getting things done, then I think it will be applauded. If it's just, a move towards convergence of, as I think you were talking about earlier, it might still be applauded. I mean, I don't know. I think whatever makes America less dysfunctional, I think the Europeans in general will be for. There are countries in the world, right or wrong, that look to America for leadership, right or wrong, and it's a dysfunctional Congress does not help America exercise that leadership, right? Again, I'm not sure that America needs to be playing the kind of hegemonic role that it is. If you're going to do that, a more functional Congress certainly helps you.
I think that what is seen as the elimination of internal political opposition and the result of what will look to the folks on the outside as the emergence of one political super party and a single party is only going to enhance that view that it really is a fascist nation.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I think that kind of eventuality should make us question whether or not America really is a democracy. But again, the state of reality as it is now makes us question whether or not this is a democracy. We criticize, quote unquote democracies in South America because they had sometimes very explicit relationships between, the dominant parties where they would just take turns being in power. And really, I mean, that's what America has looked like since the end of the war. I mean, since really forever. It's been a two-party race. We don't have to have a merger of the two main parties for us to become a fascist oligarchy. I think we've already got one foot in that grave, so to speak, already. There
was a university study that says from Princeton, it says the U.S. is actually an oligarchy. It's not a democracy. I'm not sure what the stipulations were, but yeah, it was pretty clear.
Well, I think we can all agree that it would look good on a bumper sticker. We will bid you farewell this week.
That's right. Thanks for listening. Remember, check us out on Twitter. Subscribe on our YouTube. Guerrilla Roundtable will be back next week.
Okay, folks. Adios.
Sometimes it's hard to find the words to say. I'll go ahead and say them anyway. Forget your balls and grow a pair of tits. It's hard out here for a bit.